Alright, so what we're doing, we're just going over the homework right now, right? I'll just put homework so that if you happen to look at this, you'll know what we're doing. And let's just start with number 1. We'll do about 2 or 3 of these. So it's 1 over p plus 2 over 7p equals negative 8. Alright, let's give another color. Alright, well, if you watched yesterday, and if you took notes on this, you should know what you were supposed to do in the first step. We want to get rid of the denominators, okay? Nobody likes fractions, all right? Even people that are good at fractions don't usually like working with fractions, okay? I don't particularly like fractions, but I know how to work with them, all right? That should be the same with you, okay? You might not like them, but you should still be able to know how to work with them. Add them, subtract them, multiply, divide, and all that stuff. Well, with all that said, even though I know how to add fractions together, I'm not really adding these two things together, okay? And that's what a lot of people think. They think, oh, you got to add these two together. No, you don't really have to do that. I mean, you could, but there's an easier way to do it, and that's by getting rid of the denominators. And the way we get rid of the denominators is by multiplying everything by a common denominator. So if I have, that's right, if I have 1p right here and 7p right here, the common denominator is just a 7p. If you remember how to do this, I showed you this before. Remember, you break these up into 2 columns like this. Okay, I might have not put the little up and down and lines, but you break them down in 2 columns. So what, actually, that probably confused more than anything because I didn't show it like that. But what do? You look for the numbers that show up somewhere, right? Well, there's a p that shows up here and a p that shows up here. But it only shows up once here and once here. So how many do we take? We just take one of them. Do you remember doing this? Alright, so you just take one of them. What else? What other number shows up? There's a 1 right there, right? What other number shows up? A 1 and a 7. It doesn't have to show up in both places. It just has to show up somewhere. Alright, so you got a 7 here, and it shows up 1 time, so we take that. There's nothing else. A 1, but everything's being multiplied by 1. So what do we do with those two numbers that show up like that? We just multiply them together, and that's our common denominator. Alright, that's something that you have to be able to do. Find the common denominator. But we're not really adding these fractions together. We're not really doing that. We're just trying to get rid of the denominator. So what I do is I multiply everything by that common denominator. Even the other side. Right? Everything. Not just the 7p, not just the p, everything. Now, watch why we did that. The reason we picked the common denominator is so that these denominators would all cancel out. And that's the whole gist of this lesson, is to cancel out the denominators. And we do that by multiplying everything by a common denominator. So this cancels with this. This whole 7p cancels with this whole 7p. And now we're ready to rewrite our little equation without any fractions. Now we can work this with no fractions at all. So the p's canceled out. It's just 7 times 1, which is 7. And then the 7p's cancel out. I'm just left with a 2. Right? And then this over here, you multiply those together, that's negative 56p. That's all there is. Pretty easy step, wasn't it? It was a nice step. It looked complicated at first, but then we made it pretty easy by multiplying everything by a common denominator. So let's finish this up. 7 plus 2 is 9, equals negative 56p. Divide by negative 56. See, all this from here on down is all Algebra 1. Okay, this stuff right here was the only thing that we did brand new. Everything else you should already know how to do. So divide by negative 56. Let's see. No, nothing goes into either one of those, and that's my answer. P equals negative 9 over 56. Doesn't matter if the negative's with the 9, with the 56, or in between. Alright, just have one negative somewhere. And that's your answer. That's all there is to it. So I think if you just gave it a little bit of effort, and you just gave it a shot, you should be able to do something like that. And that was a pretty easy one. Alright, let's do, let me check my answers. Let's do 2 with a crazy denominator. Okay. Now watch what we did right here to find the denominator, just to remind you before you even write down the next problem. Basically, what did we do? We just multiplied p and 7 together. What if I had this? What if I had like 2/3 plus 5/7? Okay, and I wanted to, let's say I wanted to add these fractions together. I just wanted to find a common denominator. Forget the whole entire problem. Let's just say I wanted to find a common denominator. So I got a 3 and I got a 7. Well, 1 3 shows up, right? And 1 7 shows up. What do I do with those two numbers? Just multiply them together, right? Okay, so remember that. So let's take a look at this problem now. So it's got a weird denominator, but it's not really that hard to get to it, I don't believe. Now it says minus 9. Watch what I'm going to do. I'm going to put it over 1 since I've got all these denominators here. Is that all right with you? 3 over 23p. Okay. Same deal, right? I want to get rid of the denominators. So what do I do to get rid of these denominators? Well, I've got a 17p here and a 23p here. What shows up? Now, first of all, if there are numbers like this, I always try to break them down. All right? Can I break 17 down any further? No, it's a prime number. 1 times 17 is 17, and that's the only thing, right? Nothing else multiplies to be 17. What about 23? Nope, nothing else multiplies to be 23. So they're already broken down as far as I can break them down. So there's a 17 here, so I pick one of those. There's a 23, so I pick one of those. Now there's a p here and a p here. It only shows up one time, so I pick one of them. Doesn't matter which one. Just pick one of the p's. So basically, how do I find my common denominator? Just multiply those things that are in circles together. 17 times 23. Somebody do that for me. I don't know what that is off the top of my head. Daniel, what's that? 17 times 23. 391. Okay. So, watch. This is 391p. Everybody with me on that? Okay. And then I multiply this by 391p. And multiply this by 391p. Tell you what. Okay, here's my calculator. So let's put some stuff in. Let's see what happens here. 17. Now remember, how did we get that 391 in the first place? We went 17 times 23, right? So you really don't even need a calculator for this part. So look, this 17 divides into this 391 how many times? 23 times. And also, and the p cancel out as well, don't they? Everybody see that? So that wasn't that big of a deal. So we can actually multiply this together now. I'll tell you what, let's do all this stuff. 391 times 9. So let's do that. 391 times 9 is 3519. Oh, that number looks familiar, doesn't it? So if I multiply that together, I'll just write it right here. It's 3519 and a p, correct? All right, and let's see what happens here. This 23 goes into 391 how many times? 17, right, because 23 times 17 was that 391. Right, so you didn't really need a calculator for that. And the p's cancel out, don't they? Look at that. I've canceled out the whole denominator, haven't I? Now, looks a little messy. Let's clean it up a little bit. Let's see what we have left over. That canceled. All that stuff canceled. I'm left with a 23 and a 2. Multiply them together, and that gives me 46. Good. Minus. Let's see what happens here. See, all that stuff was 3519p. So that's what I'm going to write here. 3519p. Right? Because it just had a 1 on the bottom, so I just multiplied all that stuff together. What about here? That canceled all with that, so basically I just have a 3 times 17, and that's a 1, that's a 50, what is that? 51, yeah, that's what I thought. I was going to say that, and I thought I messed up. So that's just a 51. No p here, right? Because that p canceled out. Everybody with me? So it looked like it was going to be a crazy problem, but it really wasn't that hard. I just did one little multiplication thing on a calculator, and wasn't that big of a deal. So what do I do here? Subtract 46 from both sides, and that's what, 5? So it's negative 3519p equals, yeah, that's 5, isn't it? And then look at this. This is not that big of a deal. Just divide by negative 3519. Divide by negative 3519, and that's your answer basically. Let's just write it real nice. Now, I always like to write if it's a negative, I always like to put it right in the middle. It just looks a little bit nicer to me. But it doesn't matter. You could have kept it on the bottom. You could have put it on the top if you wanted to. Or you can stick it in the middle. And that's what I'm doing. And there it is. Looks like a crazy answer, but really it wasn't much more difficult than what we did in the first problem, was it? All right, let's do one of those where you got 2 answers, okay? 5, 6, or 7. Any particular one? You want to do like the hardest one, or I don't know if one of them's harder or not. I don't know. Let's do 5. Let's do 5. 5 looks like it might be a little trouble. Um, 5's a little tougher because you got that, the sum, because the x minus 4, you're going to have to do some FOIL and stuff like that. So let's take a look at 5. So it's negative 5x squared minus 6 over x minus 4 equals negative 15x over x minus 4 again. And then we've got a big old plus 6. I'm going to put that over. I guess you probably don't really need it over 1, but I'll just put a plus 6 right there. Alright, so that's what the problem tells us. So let's go through this again. Now look, this one actually starts off a lot easier than what the other one started off. What would be my common denominator here? It's just x minus 4, that's right. But you got to be careful with this, right? You got to put that in parentheses. Since I'm multiplying this whole entire sum by something, I put that in parentheses. And I'm multiplying it by an x minus 4. Okay? Actually, to tell you the truth, you don't even need the parentheses here. Let's do the same thing here. So I multiply this by an x minus 4 as well. And then I multiply this by an x minus 4. See what I did? Found the common denominator, and I multiplied everything by that common denominator. Now, what's nice about this is I didn't really have to distribute this x minus 4 times this. When I first looked at the problem, I thought maybe I had to, but really the distributing is pretty easy for what we're going to do over here. What happens? This whole x minus 4 cancels out with this whole x minus 4, doesn't it? And I'm going to be left with this stuff. So that was nice, wasn't it? And look at this down here. This whole x minus 4 cancels out with that whole x minus 4. So far, it's pretty easy, isn't it? I think it is. So let's see what we get now. I said so far, okay? Let's see what we get. We get negative 5x squared minus 6. And why do we just get that? Because the x minus 4 canceled out, right? And it's not being multiplied by anything. Technically by 1, but it's not really being multiplied by anything. Equals, that canceled out as well. So I'm just left with negative 15x. And then this stuff right here. Now, what do you have to do to this 6? Distribute it through. That's right. So make sure that you distribute it through. So it's plus 6x minus 24. Now, this is a little disjointed, this problem right here, but it's starting to look like what? What fancy math word we talked about? Looks like a quadratic, exactly. A quadratic equation. How did I know it looks like a quadratic equation? Because it's got an x squared and an x and a number, right? Anytime you have an x squared, an x, and a number, it starts looking like a quadratic equation. Got it? So what do we do with quadratic equations? We put everything where? On the left-hand side, and we set it equal to 0. Exactly right. So let's do that. Let's keep the negative 5x right here where it is. Let's keep the minus 6 here. And let's just take all this stuff and move it to the other side. Okay? So how do we move all that stuff? Well, that becomes a plus 15x. This becomes a negative 6x. And then if I move that over, it becomes a plus 24. Now, I moved everything from the right over to the left-hand side, so that means everything's going to be 0 on the right-hand side. Again, I think so far it hasn't been all that difficult. Right? You saw it was a quadratic. All I did was just add 15x, subtract 6x, and add a 24. That's all I did. Then I got a 0 on this side. Now, let's add some like terms together. Well, there's no other x squared, so I just go negative 5x squared. So I'm done with that. Let's do the x's next. What x's do we have? 15x minus 6x, and what's that? Plus 9x. Right? So I'm done with the x's. Now let's add these up. Negative 6 plus 24, and that's what? 18? Is that right? Yep. And that equals what? 0. So far, so good. I think. Am I the only one, or do you agree with me? It hasn't been that bad? It hasn't been that bad so far, right? I know what people say, well, when you do it, it's not so bad. It makes it look easy. Yeah, but if you understand what I'm doing, then I think you understand what's going on. Look at this. How in the world am I going to get x by itself on something crazy looking like this? I have a couple options, but I definitely have one that I want to use over another one. What's that? Yeah, I would definitely use the quadratic formula on this. Okay? And we just finished a lesson on quadratic formula, didn't we? So it should be fresh in our mind. So what is the A? It's -5. What is the B? +9. And what is the C? It's +18. So now let's chuck all this into our formula. All right, so x equals, it's -b. I'm not going to write down the formula. You should have it memorized already. So it's -b. Hey, I'm just going to finish one problem. Is that right? And then I'll be good. So you can stick around if you want. Or if you want to help. It's quadratic formula. Do you want to do a quadratic formula problem? No? Oh, okay. Okay. So it's -b, which is -9, plus or minus the square root of b squared. Well, what's b? It's 9. We square it, and it's 81. Minus 4 times a, which is -5, times c, which is 18. And that whole thing is over 2 times a. 2 times -5. That's just plugging. Now we chug, right? Plug and chug. So it's -9 plus or minus the square root. And, I don't know. Let's just stick that in a calculator, huh? So calculators are good for something, aren't they? So it's 81. It's minus a negative, which is plus, isn't it? All right. It's 4 times 5, which is 20. And then times 18, right? And then you add that, it's 441. So that's 441. Let's see, I don't know, does that come out? You probably can't take the square root of that, can you? I really doubt it. Let's see. Second function, 441. Yeah, it does come out. Perfect. That's what I wanted. Isn't it what you wanted? To come out nice and easy like that? Yeah, that comes out to 21. And that's all over what? -10. So let's see what we get. Let's simplify this. -9 plus or minus. That comes out to be 21. And that's over -10. Now remember, we get two answers for this. This is two answers, isn't it? Plus or minus, but you need to simplify it. So watch. It's -9. Oops, let's not do that yet. It's -9 plus 21 over -10. And it's also what? -9 minus 21 over -10. What's this? 12, is that right? 12 over -10? Did I do that right? Reduce this fraction. 2 goes into both of those, what? -6/5. Did I do that right?
Yeah.
Okay, good. So that's one answer, isn't it? And then what's this? That's -30, right? Over -10. Check my arithmetic. Sometimes I mess my arithmetic up. So that's equal to +3. Is that what I read off to you? Yep, sure is. There you go. Now look, that's not like a problem that just takes you 2 seconds to do. You can't just look at it and come up with an answer. I mean, obviously, you saw the steps that it took us to get to that answer, right? But take them step by step, just step by step. You'll be good to go. All right. Well, I think that's enough. That was review for the worksheet. And that's it.